You said something to the effect of like, man, cent per point for me at least doesn't necessarily matter. How about experience per point? Like this was EPP, experience per point. I had an amazing stay here. I didn't even look at the cent per point, something like that.
But first, let me just let you guys know that this was actually a couple of clips from a podcast I did not only with Ninja, but also one I did with the BS podcast. Just overall giving some anecdotal points about cent per point, on their opinion on when cent per point matters, and when it sometimes matters just a little bit less, the nuances of an experience, as well as how to even value cent per point when you're factoring in like buying points, how you earn them, the time of year that you're actually booking something, and so much more. In my opinion, before we get into theirs, is that cent per point does matter, that you're getting at the very least a floor of a certain amount of points based on the ecosystem that is at least a little bit higher than what you could maybe even buy those points for, etc. But it's also not going to stop me from booking a hotel or an airline just because the cent per point may have been better at a different property that I don't want to stay at. So I'm kind of in the middle of this entire argument. But with that said, let's hear the opinions of people way smarter than me. As always, right?
You coined that term, experience per point. So where does that necessarily come from? Like, have you always felt like experience per point is the way, or has it come just over time of being in this game? Because you said you've been in this game since 2007. So you definitely have a lot more experience than me and a lot of other people in the game. So what do you think on that topic, cent per point?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I'm really glad you brought that up because, everyone's going to have their own version of even how they value their cents per point. I mean, there's people in the community that will claim they're getting, 36x on their built card, which, I guess if you do the math that way, you can look at it that way as well. But experience per point at the end of the day is really just, you can keep it very simple. Did you have a good time or did you not have a good time? Because even if you had gotten an awesome redemption of 10 cents per point on a flight to Japan, if that flight, really wasn't a good experience, maybe something really about the service that wasn't the way you wanted it to be, or even the actual product itself, I would not like to feel like I parted with so many points just because I wanted to get a high redemption value, especially, when you sort of look at the way that you can redeem different points at different locations. I mean, it's all very time-based too. If I redeem, like even for a lot of the dynamic stays for Hilton or anything that's involving a lot of other hotel chains other than Hyatt, you're really just kind of making sure, number one, do I have the points? And I think the caveat to that is to make sure that you do have a floor at least. So it's a little bit of, if you wouldn't redeem your points, for example, I wouldn't want to redeem a chase point for anything less than 1 cent per point. It just wouldn't make sense. But in other people's cases, they look at chase points as their Hyatt points, and they won't even use those for anything less than 2 cents per point. So experience per point is not going to be consistent across the board. There's going to be many different factors, and part of the experience per point is going to be, Luke has brought this up in the past and jokingly, like, you can't stay first class while your family's in coach, like the experience for you might be great, but the experience once you get back to the room is probably not going to be your the best time. Right. So, that's kind of why, from my experience for the experience per point is just to make sure that the overall trip sort of just makes sense, that you're meeting your floor requirements. Like, for example, the Roosevelt in New Orleans isn't necessarily the best cents per point redemption and isn't even the best redemption amount for one of my free night certificates. But ultimately, number one, I need to use it before it expires. So I'd rather utilize that certificate. And number two, I don't want to have to play the game of going back and forth between hotels to make sure that I'm getting a better redemption here. It's all about just, I'm trying to enjoy myself, and I'm on vacation, as most of us do, right? If we work so hard to earn these points, we want to be able to enjoy them once we actually get to that point. And at the end of the day, I'm not thinking about, the redemption value. I'm thinking about what the overall experience was and the memories I gained from that.
And candidly, like over the years, I've always done a redemption, did the calculation after the fact. That was always, I never really cared. It's like, do I have enough to stay there? Okay, cool. But you're definitely right about like, what's the cash out value? How much could you buy these points for? Does it make sense? It literally, does it make sense to do this?
And real quick on that note too, I mean, my cent per point value for being a Hilton Diamond member is going to be different than someone's cent per point value if they're maybe just a silver member, because I'm going to get extra added benefits. If I really think about the added $15 per guest, up to 2 guests for the credits that I'm getting while I'm there, if there's anything additional, even just like the water bottle when I walk into the room, maybe a couple of snacks. I mean, there is a dollar value we can attribute to that. And cents per point is just it's the closest thing to a unified metric to use just purely on a math basis across the whole entire spectrum of everyone that's in the game. I mean, it's really the only standardized method because it's just so subjective when we start getting into experience per point. But I think that's what makes, everyone's sort of credit card journey and their identity very specific to them. And that's, I think, where, if you have loyalty to certain programs, your experience is going to be way different, even if you're not getting, the best value per point if we're looking on a pure math basis.
Yeah, that's so true. That's so true. Like when I went on the BS podcast guys, Shaun, Lane, and Sherwin on their podcast, that was like the main contention, which was, maybe experience versus high cent per point valuations. And we eventually met a middle ground, but I could see, and he mentioned this was a bit of a flaw himself, because I brought up the point, like, he didn't want to stay at this one, I think it was a Grand Hyatt in Hong Kong, maybe.
There are definitely hotels I've wanted to stay at. Like, I've wanted to stay at the Grand Hyatt Hong Kong. When this goes up, have been in Hong Kong 3 times before. And I've never stayed at the Grand Hyatt Hong Kong, but I've always wanted to stay there. It looks like a very nice hotel. But the redemption, I just can't justify it. It's 25K points per night. It's like $320 cash. That's just not worth it to me when there are hotels that I can get much better value at with those Hyatt points. But at the same time, it's like, it's kind of stupid because I have these points. I want to stay there. I should probably just stay there. But I still do treat these points like a currency, just like anything else.
A lot of the hotels are really awkward because like they're too expensive for me to want to pay real money and cash for it, but they're not expensive enough for me to use my rewards at. And I sometimes I'm guilty of like stockpiling a bunch of points until like things devalue.
Something like that. He really wanted to stay there, but the cent per point wasn't there. He was like, there's another place that's not the place I want to stay at, but the cent per point's better. So I can't physically get me to book that stay. He just couldn't do it. So I was like, but Shaun.
But Shaun, just think about this, right? Think about a world where it's a random month out of the year. Maybe it's not the month that you're traveling there, but say it's like in August or something like that. And the Grand Hyatt in Hong Kong just happens to be inflated by it's $500 now. So you're getting pretty good cent per point valuation. Nothing really changed except for the time of year. But if you were there, you could say you experienced it, and maybe you would have a really good time. Maybe you and your girlfriend had a really amazing time. Like, wow, this was a great stay. Like, the views are cool. However they treated us was amazing. And it's crazy. I didn't book this because, a few months ago it said 200, but now it says 5. Do you ever think about that?
I do. And first, let me say that is a completely 100% accurate analysis of the dilemma. Okay, that's totally accurate. I think my only defenses are, one, when I do look at cents per point, I tend to look at an overall kind of general trend of the price. So if I see the price is overinflated one night, let's say for some reason it was $1,000 for 2 nights, I'm not automatically going to go, let me go redeem it right now. I'm still going to go okay, well, if the hotel's normally sells for $300, unless it was some special event and there was no other places to stay, or all the other hotels had been, similarly inflated, then I wouldn't just arbitrarily go and redeem it in that sense. But you are right to a degree where let's say I was going there during a time and during that whole month, all the prices on the hotels were inflated. I would probably redeem it. And I totally acknowledge that is a disconnect in my brain where I know logically it's the same, that it is, I'm still getting the same experience roughly, but it's at the same time, I still want to optimize the points to some degree.
I always like to bring up my 2 experiences with the 2 Curio properties, the one in Charleston and the one in Kentucky.
One thing I'm reminded of as we're talking about good redemption versus bad redemption is a story I have between 2 Hilton properties at two different areas. So Hilton has these brands. I think there's 19 different brands. What I would consider mid-level in some cases would be a Curio collection. Curios are very nice. Typically, I've found that they're at older properties and they sometimes renovate the inside and stuff like that. Usually they're just older by nature, the ones that I've been to at least. And there was one redemption that was in Charleston, South Carolina, and it's called the Mills House Hotel. I talk about it all the time. I think it was 80,000 points, and it was like 300 a night, or two. It was maybe even less. It might have been 270 a night, 300 a night. So the cent per point was awful. It was the worst. It was absolutely. I think it was less than. Yeah, it's less than 0.5. It's like 0.3, 0.4. Absolutely horrible. But I wanted to stay there, and that was a great stay. The Mills house was amazing. That was like one of the most magical, if I could say magical on here, most magical stays that we've ever done. And there was like, you get the food and beverage credit, $15 a day, walking around, historic Charleston, everything, right? But the cent per point was horrible. Then we stayed at another Curio property, the same brand, in Lexington, Kentucky, when I was visiting my friend Calby. This was a Curio, same thing, 80,000 points, the same amount of points. But the cash price was about 400, maybe 450. It was like, more than 0.5, almost double the value than the Mills house. Literally, we walked into this, the Campbell, I'm putting it on blast, the Campbell. We walked in there. The front is nice. On the pictures, everything looks nice. You walk in, the person at the front desk is nasty. There's a smell of mold pretty much everywhere. And we had bugs everywhere. The wallpaper's ripping off. And we were lost on the way to the room because there's like I don't know, it's like The Shining, and there's like girls in the hallway and stuff like that. And we ended up we slept for 5 hours. We woke up with like pretty much like sick. We were sick. We literally got a colds after that. We think it was like mold and stuff like that, or who knows. Ended up calling Hilton, complaining, and we ended up getting the entire 2 nights refunded, 160,000 points. And I couldn't have known that one was so bad, because by the pictures, both Curios were great on paper. Just one of them had a great redemption, the horrible one, and one of them had a horrible redemption, which happened to be the best one. So I think sometimes factoring in, it's hard because you don't know before you get there, but just knowing in retrospect that horrible redemption ended up being like the best trip ever, and the really good redemption ended up being like the worst trip ever, is something to kind of keep in mind. So it's like, if you like that Grand Hyatt and for some reason it's drawing you to you, maybe that experience could outweigh any cares of cent per point whatsoever, because it did in my case.
I mean, the math is pretty easy, but again, it gets a little bit down into the weeds. Like, for example, because I've got several Amex cards that earn MR points, membership reward points, I usually like to I actually transfer over, even speculatively. I know a lot of people have different opinions on that, to Hilton, because I know I'm going to stay at Hilton. For example, I transferred over about 100,000 points over to Hilton not too long ago when they had the 30% bonus. So at that point, you kind of have to if you look at the math that way, it's not going to be as easy or direct. You kind of have to, I'm a very visual person. I have to sort of lay it out there and determine, number one, how did I even earn these points too? And I feel like that plays into the experience per point, because a point, 100,000 points of me earning that without a sub is going to be obviously way harder than if I just had 5 referrals on my business gold. A lot of the points that I was accruing was actual referrals. So the way I looked at it from last year as well was accruing referral points, utilizing that because I actually have up to working on a P5, but a P4 strategy, 4 players in this game. So when there's and maybe that changes my experience with cents per point, because I'm not trying to hodl them for too long. I'm trying to, at least I've got enough to go around, right? And especially with a program like Hilton, when you're playing the game and you have extra people, both family, friends, or whoever it may be, to sort of stack those points. Combining those points for bookings is really easy too. Being able to transfer points over, it makes group stays just a whole lot easier.
So player 4 strategy. Oh my God, that's crazy. So how are you doing that? You have 3 wives?
No, definitely not. That sounds expensive. No way.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.